From Peterson reaching out to millions of followers with his views, to him saying that toxic masculinity is needed by society, here's the real impact Jordan Peterson has had on masculinity. Now, it's gotta be said, like it or not, Peterson has been quite an influential figure over the past decade. Ever since he made a 3-part video series called Professor Against Political Correctness in 2016, the guy's been popping off, especially among young conservative men. He's got over 5 million followers on Twitter right now, so it's clear there are folks who like what he's saying. And boy, does he have a lot to say. Peterson has made a reputation for himself as someone who challenges politically correct concepts and instead opts for more traditionalist views and ideas. His views on masculinity, for example, have resulted in him getting criticized by a ton of folks. You see, Peterson likes to limit masculinity to a lot of basic principles, mainly focusing on attributes like physical strength or dominance. He believes that men should be able to protect and provide for their loved ones, often through both physical and mental fortitude. And it's through this that he suggests that men can find meaning in their lives. Peterson is also a strong believer in the concepts of personal responsibility and integrity. Now, you might agree with his ideas, but not everyone does. In fact, there are loads of people who find his take on masculinity to be quite essentialist. Folks criticize him for painting a picture of gender that's too simple and doesn't take into account the diverse ways in which the definition might have changed over the years. And that's not all. Peterson's views on gender and sexuality have led to him getting called out before too. In fact, his critics often try to paint the picture that he's some kind of misogynist, with his views on women being totally outdated. They often say that this goes hand in hand with his impact on masculinity, because he continues to say that one gender has to be dominant over the other. While his fans might chalk up those criticisms as SJWs just doing what they do best, the fact is that some of Jordan's takes definitely make you raise your eyebrows. Like, remember the time he said feminists have an unconscious wish for brutal male dominance? I mean, who even says that? It's no wonder people have gone after him for his seemingly misogynistic approach to feminism and women's role in society. Now, it's gotta be said, Jordan's view on feminism hasn't exactly been great. In fact, some of his followers might even think that being masculine means opposing feminism, because it somehow goes against the concept of men dominating society. That's not really the case, but if you were to listen to Jordan's view on this, that's definitely the vibe you'd get. He's gone into arguments with feminists many times before. He once mentioned how the notion that women had been oppressed throughout history was appalling. He doesn't think women had a rougher time across history compared to men. And I mean, you don't have to be a historian to know that this simply isn't true. Even in the United States, women couldn't vote until the early 1900s. It's these things that his critics often bring up when they're looking to analyze the guy, since it makes it seem like he's purposely trying to ignore the legitimate concerns women have, and instead opting to paint a picture of men as being the sole providers in society. It is safe to say that this line of thinking has had a huge impact on how his followers view masculinity and gender as a whole. For his core audience, especially his younger listeners, Peterson is like this figure who's bringing back what it means to be a man. And while some others might criticize the way he's trying to appeal to the masses, it often doesn't matter because his endless popularity with his followers seems to be on the rise. That said, not everything that Peterson preaches about masculinity is linked to feminism. In fact, a lot of his advice for young men has to do with them finding their own meaning in life, again, through the concept of personal responsibility. A lot of men, especially those who feel like they're adrift, tend to resonate with his line of thinking, especially since his message comes across as one of hope. The idea is that through their suffering, they'll also be able to inherently become stronger. People derive meaning from being able to overcome this suffering and become stronger as a result. It's an encouraging view of the harsh realities of life, and it's no surprise why so many people flock to this ideology. It's just calming to know that even after difficult times, you can expect betterment, especially if you become a more competent, stronger, and dominant individual. His followers believe in personal growth for this reason, and well, it seems like a decent outlook to have on life. Part of why Peterson is so popular is because his followers have applied his teachings to their lives, and they genuinely feel like they've found some direction and hope in an otherwise volatile world. But even despite the positive elements he's preached about masculinity, many still think that his overall impact has generally been harmful. That's because even if your focus is solely on telling men how they should behave, instead of policing women, critics of Jordan Peterson bring up the concept of toxic masculinity. Folks like to lump Peterson together with the likes of Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan, often calling the three the trio of toxic masculinity in today's social world. While to some, Jordan might appear as a figure who's giving them direction in life, others say that what Peterson is really doing is trying to indoctrinate men who feel especially vulnerable and hopeless. It helps that many of these men have a shared set of beliefs that tend to be on the conservative side. And because of this, he purposely appeals to them in an attempt to boost his own popularity and relevance. This is why you'll often see the guy talking about how the left is ruining the sense of tradition, and that men are being attacked for no reason. When his listeners see him making such statements, they feel a sense of kinship with him. This makes them a lot more likely to adopt some of his more, let's say, controversial views, especially those on women and feminism. Many online gender experts have also been critical of how Peterson and Tate are allowed to freely indoctrinate the youth through social media. These critics think that Peterson uses free speech as a guise to funnel his potentially dangerous views and ideologies to a whole new generation of people. But all that aside, just what parts of Peterson's views on masculinity do his critics find toxic to begin with? Well, his critics say that when he's putting men in a box, by telling them that they're all supposed to be dominant or strong, he's actually being toxic. According to them, men don't need to fall into any specific category or attribute. And really, putting a label on how a man is supposed to be is toxic in itself. So whenever Jordan says that men are supposed to be the providers in society and that they're the ones who have to be dominant, his critics are quick to call him out on it. Folks also say that when he's instructing men to have dominance over women, he's suppressing the role of women in society too. Because of this, he's essentially creating an entire army of misogynist thinkers, just like him. So imagine if everyone thought just like Peterson. Women really wouldn't be able to have a say in what's right and wrong anymore, would they? Well, at least, that's what a lot of the people critical of Jordan's line of thinking seem to believe. But as it turns out, Jordan has his own view on the matter. In fact, he thinks that toxic masculinity, to some extent, is needed in society. During an interview with the Dutch news station VPRO in 2019, Peterson said that he's all for it. According to him, society needs men to function. I mean, who else is going to do all the impossible tasks like constructing buildings? Jordan says that as much as folks might disagree with his traditionalist line of thinking, it's clear that for society to function, men need to maintain the characteristics he's described as being necessary for them. Without men, the infrastructure that's been built over the years would cease to function, and society as a whole would come to a halt. Men often literally work themselves to death, and in many cases, they don't even get thanked for it. Instead, it's these men who risk their lives and develop cities that end up being called toxic simply for living their lives as they see fit. Peterson continued that usually it's university professors, who are among the most protected and privileged class, who have issues with how men are defined nowadays. But they don't really care to explain who's going to do all the tough things that men do if you take away those core principles from the very definition. Because of just how many opinions there are on the topic, narrowing down Peterson's impact on masculinity is definitely a tough thing to do. But it often comes down to people's personal preferences and how much his message resonates with them. So, do you believe Jordan Peterson is having a positive or negative impact on masculinity? In any case, from him saying that toxic masculinity is needed by society, to Peterson reaching out to millions of followers with his views, that was the impact Jordan Peterson has had on masculinity.